Hi, everyone. For those of you that I haven't met, which I don't think is very many of you, my name's Sarah Whiteway. I am one of the school coordinators on the Creating Healthy Schools and Communities grant, and Kate Huber is here with me as well. So today we're talking about school wellness policy training, and we're going to try to go through quite a lot of information with you today to try to get you as a bit of the experts for your district on wellness policies, so that when we're doing all of the assessment and updating the policy, you know a lot of the information. And so you can kind of be one of the leaders in your district for this. If you didn't already, Kate put in the chat the sign-in form, so please just sign in. All right. So overall, today we're going to be going over the federal and state wellness policy regulations that you need to know. And then the next part is going to be how to assess your district's wellness policy. So I'm going to start with the federal regulations. So overall, you have to have a wellness policy. If your school district participates in the National School Lunch Program or any other federal child nutrition program, you are required by law to have a local school wellness policy, which we usually refer to as a district wellness policy for all the schools that are under that district. As well as being important because it's part of the law and you have to have one, it's also nice to have a school wellness policy because it helps the district's effort to create supportive school nutrition and physical activity environments. So it provides a common language for everyone, and it ensures that health and wellness is part of your overall school culture, and it makes sure that wellness practices don't come and go as teachers come and go or administrators come and go or even volunteers, so that your practices are sustainable over time because you've got it concretely in a policy. So now we're going to spend most of this presentation talking about what you have to have in your wellness policy. So what are the required elements? And all of these are required by the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010. Some of them were required before, but now it's a little bit more specific of what has to be in the policy. And we're going to divide these up into 6 categories. So the first one we're going to talk about is stakeholder participation. Then I'm going to go through some nutrition guidelines, and then I'm going to turn it over to Kate, and she's going to cover nutrition education and promotion, physical education and activity, monitoring and evaluation, and public notification. So first up, I'm going to be talking about stakeholder participation. So that's who you have to include in all the things wellness policy. So it's who you have to include in developing, implementing, reviewing, and updating your policy. All of your districts already have a policy in place. So what we're really talking about is who you have to include in the implementation, the review, and the update of the policy. And there's a lot of people that should be included. So really it comes down to you want to include as many of these people as possible. So parents, caregivers, you want to have students, you want to have representatives from the school food authority, you want to have teachers, both physical education and health teachers and classroom teachers. You want to have your school nurse or other school health professionals. You want to include some school board members, school administrators, and the general public. So these are the people that are specifically listed in who you need to include in all of your policy things, or who you need to invite to all your policy activities. But we'd also just like to mention that you should really also make sure that you're trying to include people with disabilities and people from various cultures. As well, we wanted to mention that maintenance workers and people who provide wraparound care at the school might have some very important information about how wellness is being used around the school, and they should also be included. All right, so that's who you have to have in your policy. And now I'm going to get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of what the nutrition guidelines are that have to be in your wellness policy. So you have to have nutrition guidelines and it has to be for all food and beverages that are sold on the school campus during the school day. And all of those guidelines have to be consistent with either the federal regulations for school meals or the Smart Snacks and School Nutrition Standards. So the federal regulation for school meals, that's the school lunch and breakfast that is served to your students at the school by the food service. And there are a lot of regulations. They know those regulations, and I'm not going to talk so much about that. I'm going to talk more about the Smart Snacks and School Nutrition Standards, because that applies to anything that isn't like your school lunch and your school breakfast. So some important definitions before we get into that. So when they say sold, they mean sold to students for immediate consumption. School campus is any property or vehicle owned by the district, so not just within the school building itself. And the school day, they consider the period from midnight before the school day begins until 30 minutes after the end of the school day. And those are going to be pretty important later when we talk about fundraisers. So and in terms of Smart Snacks standards, this is everything that you're selling to students that's not your school breakfast and school lunch. So it has to meet some general nutrition guidelines. So it can be a grain product. It has to contain at least be more than half whole grain. Or it can have as the first ingredient a fruit, a vegetable, a dairy food, or a protein food. Or it can be a combination food, but it has to have at least a quarter cup of fruits and or vegetables. And then so those are like the categories can be, but whichever one it is in those, it also has to meet the nutrient standards for calories, sodiums, fats, and total sugars. So you can have a whole grain or a fruit, vegetable, dairy food, or protein food, or a combination food, and it has to meet these standards. So for calories, if you can class things as either a snack or an entree, and the calories obviously are different. So snack is less than 200 calories, entree less than 350, sodium either less than 200 or less than 480. For both of those, has to be less than 35% calories from fat, less than 10% of those calories from saturated fat, and less than 35% by weight of sugar. And then there's also some guidelines for beverages. So this is sort of the biggest size of milk and juice that you can sell to students. In elementary school, it's 8 fluid ounces, and in middle and high school, it's 12 fluid ounces. And by milk and juice, they really only mean unflavored or flavored fat-free milk, unflavored low-fat milk, milk alternatives, and then 100% fruit or vegetable juice. It can be diluted with water, but it can't have any additional sweeteners. And then only at high school, you can also sell low and no calorie beverages. They have to be less than 12 fluid ounces if they have 5 calories per fluid ounce, and they can be up to 20 fluid ounces if they have less than 5 calories per 8 fluid ounce. So these are some pretty specific regulations, but you'll see that it's easy to fall outside of them if you're not paying attention to them. And then New York State also has an extra regulation that basically says you can't sell soda, chewing gum, or any candy to students during the school day. And most of those things wouldn't meet the Smart Snacks guidelines anyways, but this is just a little extra rule in New York State. And then some states got fundraising exemptions so that they would be able to sell some of those things that don't meet Smart Snacks guidelines for fundraisers, but New York State has no fundraising exemptions. So none of those things can be sold during the school day for students to eat, even if it's a fundraiser. So just to give you a few examples, you would be allowed to sell cookie dough because that's generally not going to be something that they're going to eat right away. They would take that home to make cookies. You could have a chicken barbecue because that would meet the Smart Snacks guidelines. You could sell pies because those wouldn't be generally eaten right there and there. Then spaghetti dinners could meet Smart Snacks guidelines, and Easter chocolate sales are also as long as you're not selling the students the chocolate right at school for them to eat, as long as it's something that is going home with them at the end of the day, those would be allowed. But not allowed would be any selling candy bars, bake sales, or candygrams. And then you also have to have standards for your non-sold food. So far we've just been talking about food that the school is selling to students, but there's other food in schools too. So things like classroom parties, school celebrations, rewards, and those don't have to meet Smart Snacks standards, but you do have to put in your policy what the standard is going to be for that food. So maybe you're going to say that it does meet Smart Snacks standards, but maybe you don't want to be quite that strict, but you are going to say that you're not going to sell any soda, or you're not going to give any soda to students, even during classroom parties and school celebrations. Whatever your district decides makes sense for you, you have to put that in your policy. And even if what you've decided is people can give kids whatever food you want, you have to write that in the policy. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Kate now for the nutrition education and promotion part.
All right, before we shift to my section, does anyone have any questions about the foods that can or cannot be sold to students during the school day? So that also includes foods that are not just sold by the school district or a representative of the school district, but anyone. For example, if you have a Little League baseball team that is selling candy bars as a fundraiser, and little Johnny brings in his box of candy bars to sell to his classmates, that also is against the federal regulation, because you're still having someone sell foods that don't meet the Smart Snack regulation to students for immediate consumption during the school day. Also includes the school bus. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. All right. So when we talk about nutrition education and nutrition promotion, the federal regulation require that you set measurable goals for nutrition education and nutrition promotion. Part of the reason for them being measurable goals, we'll talk about in a few minutes around the assessing the policy and how well it's being implemented. So if the goal that you set isn't measurable, you're not able to then assess how well it's being implemented, which is also part of the federal regulation. So we talk about education. This is really curriculum based. What it's going to be taught in health class, in science class, as part of just the general curriculum. How are you going to teach students about nutrition? What cafeteria interventions are you going to have? Are there going to be posters in the cafeteria? Food service, staff training, community nutrition education. Any goals that you have for nutrition education need to be listed in the policy. Also, what are your goals for nutrition promotion? Will you encourage staff to model healthy eating and physical activity? Will you offer taste tests either in the cafeteria or outside of the cafeteria? Are you going to have school gardens or farm to school activities? Are you going to include regular information in newsletters or have an annual or biannual wellness fair for students and families? Food marketing. Federal law also requires that any marketing of food and beverages during the school day on school campus or on school grounds must meet the Smart Snack standards. So that really is anywhere that you might have some kind of food marketing or promotion. So that can be even promoting fundraisers. So most of the districts that we work with do a chocolate sale around the springtime, usually aligned with Easter. Even though you're allowed to hold that fundraiser, you're not allowed to advertise that fundraiser in school, because that is marketing a food that does not meet SMART snacks. Food and beverage cups and containers, food display racks. So you can see an example of the Gatorade water cooler. So these are not allowed to be used in schools. With that being said, the government realizes that schools have limited money. And so for schools to go through and replace everything that has Gatorade or Pepsi on it isn't realistic. So policies have been written to say that current products are grandfathered in, but when a district goes to replace those products, they need to be replaced with items that do not violate the food marketing regulations. All right, physical education and activity. Again, measurable goals. So for education, you have to list out what are your goals for how many minutes of physical education students K through 12 will be engaged in. Now that could be that you're just going to follow the New York State guidelines, or it can be something above and beyond what those guidelines are. Talks about what curriculum and how many active minutes you hope your students to have in part of physical education class. Then there's physical activity. So this is all those areas before, during, and after school that you're hoping to have your students engaging in some type of physical activity. So that could be encouraging teachers to have active breaks after every class period or every hour. It can be mandating recess for students K to 12 and making sure that it can't be taken away for students who are having behavior issues or haven't completed all of their schoolwork. Looking at intramurals. Are you going to have intramural programs? Are you going to have modified basketball programs? Are you going to encourage safe routes to school and work with the community to set up a walking school bus or other types of ways that students can walk and bike and roll to school? For the PE requirements, New York State requires that students in kindergarten through third grade have PE daily for at least 120 minutes per week. Ideally, that is in the gym with a physical education teacher. Some districts will get around that by saying that they're going to be in the gym for 3 days a week with the PE teacher, and 2 days a week, they are going to engage in some type of physical activity lesson with their classroom teacher that has been provided by the PE teacher. Grades 4 through 6 has to have PE at least 3 times per week, or again, at least 120 minutes per week. For secondary school, and that can be grades 7 to 12 or 6 to 12, if that is how the physical building is configured. If 6th, 7th, and 8th grade is in one building, then the 6th grade can follow the mandates for the secondary school, which requires that they have an average of 90 minutes per week. So that could be 3 times per week in one semester and 2 times per week the following semester, or alternating weeks, however the schedule allows. Next is monitoring and evaluation. So your policy must designate one person who's going to be responsible for ensuring that the school complies with the wellness policy. So that could be your district wellness coordinator. That could be someone in the business office, someone else in the district office, but you must designate by title who is responsible for making sure that the school complies with the policy. In addition, you have to assess the policy every 3 years to make sure that it is not only in compliance with the state and federal regulations, but that the school is actually implementing the policy as it's written. So part of the grant has Sarah and I coming in and working with the districts to help assess policy and practices. So your school health index that most of you have completed so far can be used when the district is audited for their wellness policy. You can use the school health index to say, this is the data that we collected around how well our policy is being implemented. We're going to talk a little bit about WellSat in just a minute. That is a tool to assess the policy itself and the language contained in the policy. And then you also have to write a description of the progress made in attaining the goals of that policy. So if you're not completely implementing your policy with fidelity yet, you have to talk about the progress that you're making in your plan to implement it fully in the next 1 to 2 years. So not only do you have to assess the policy, but you also have to make recommendations to improve the policy if there are any. And that can be based on the results of the assessment, changes to local priorities and community needs. As your wellness goals are met, maybe you want to change them, make them more strict, more stringent. New health information and new technology is always coming out around health and wellness. And then occasionally there are updated state and federal guidance or standards related to the wellness policy that you would need to consider when updating the policy. Last, public notification. So in addition to assessing the policy, comparing it to local and model policies, you also have to inform the public about the content and the implementation of your assessments and any updates to the local wellness policy. So posting the results of the school health index or a summary of them, holding an open forum so that parents can come and talk with you about how well they think it's being implemented. So not only do you have to assess it, but you also have to share that information with the public, either through your website or through email, whatever form of notification, but you have to share it with them. And this same thing, I apologize, making that assessment available to the public in an easily understood manner. So that could be various languages. It can be making sure that it's posted in a way that is accessible for people with disabilities or different visual impairments, making sure that anyone who wants access to it can have it. So we went through a lot of information about what needs to be in your policy. Any questions up to this point before we talk about how to actually go through and assess the policy?
Question, Katie?
Sure.
What about when you have tournaments at schools and your boosters are selling cupcakes and pizza?
Junk?
You got it.
Yes. So the law says that smart snacks guidelines only apply during the school day. So typically tournaments are held in the evenings and on the weekends, so the smart snacks would not apply. However, that is an area that the district can choose to create stronger language. So an example could be that 50% of the items offered for sale must meet the smart snacks guidelines. So you're not saying that they can't sell any of it. You're just saying that they have to at least offer some healthy options as well. Other examples could be that the healthier options must be sold at a lower price point. So a bottle of water costs 50 cents, a bottle of pop is $2. So some of that behavioral, environmental help, students and anyone is more likely to buy the 50-cent bottle of water than the $2 bottle of soda because it's cheaper, and then you're naturally helping them to make the better decision. Did that answer your question? All right, thank you. Any other questions? All right, so we'll move forward to assessment. So the district wellness committee or a subset of the wellness committee, if the committee is very large, should assess the policy. We recommend you include all stakeholders in the assessment. We like the WellSat 3.0. WellSat is a tool developed by the Rudd Center at Yale University, and it includes 6 different categories. So as you remember, most of you have completed the School Health Index. The School Health Index really looks at what's actually happening in your buildings. The WellSat is looking at what's actually written in your policy. So when you assess your policy, you're not assessing it at how well it is being implemented. You're really only assessing what does the policy say should be happening. Each item is rated either a 0, a 1, or a 2. If you score a 0, it means that it's not mentioned at all. A 1 means that it's mentioned, but it's a weak statement. It is either vague or it's situational, meaning that a certain aspect of the policy only needs to happen during after school or before school, or it has language that it says, well, you should or are encouraged to. That doesn't mean you have to, it just means that you should. So we want strong statements in your policy that make it very clear what the expectation is for students, staff, families, anyone who's impacted by the policy. Will, must, prohibit, very clear about whether something can or cannot happen. Each section scores a comprehensive and a strength score. So your comprehensive score is always going to be higher than your strength score. The comprehensiveness is any item that's rated a 1 or a 2. The strength is any item that scores a 2. All of the scores are averaged across the 6 sections to provide an overall comprehensiveness and strength score for the policy. So you'll get a score for each section, but then an overall score as well. So what are the next steps? We've gone through what do you have to have in your policy, very quickly about how to assess the policy. So what's next? What do you need to do? So first, schedule a district wellness committee meeting sometime in November. Invite Sarah and or I to attend the meeting. At that meeting, we can begin to assess your policy using the WellSat. And it's similar to the School Health Index, Sarah and I will come in and take the committee through the process so that you really just need to pull the committee together and tell them when and where they need to be there. Prior to the meeting, ask everyone to read through their policy before the meeting. Inevitably, when we have had meetings in the past, and I've been doing this for 20 years, people will say, I didn't even know we had a committee, or not a committee, but I didn't even know we had a wellness policy. So it helps to have everyone read through that policy before coming to the meeting, so they're at least a little bit familiar with it. And then, as I said, Sarah and I will come to that meeting and facilitate assessing your policy. We will score the policy and make note of any areas that scored or 1 or 0. And those are the areas that the district will decide about strengthening. At bare minimum, we'll look to see if you're in compliance with state and federal regulation. And if you're not in compliance, we'll at least get the policy up to compliance. After you're in compliance, we'll talk about, well, what are some of those areas of best practice that maybe we want to strengthen in our policy? Those can be things around recess or classroom celebrations. There's lots of different areas. So timeline. Today, we're doing the wellness policy training number 1. Hopefully in November, you'll have a district wellness meeting to assess the policy. We'll come back in December for part 2, where we're going to talk about best practices and implementation. Then after that December 6th meeting, schedule another meeting with your district wellness committee, January, February, to look at, again, strengthening your policy. In terms of timeline, this isn't a process that should be rushed. Updating a policy with fidelity and in a comprehensive way can take anywhere from 6 to 18 months. So even though we had said that our goal for year 2 of the grant is to have you update your policies, we really want the process to begin in year 2. And if it's over the summer or beginning of year 3, when your school board finally adopts the new policy, that's okay, because we want to make sure that it's done well and that you're not just doing it to check a box. So some best practices, we really encourage you to hold multiple open forums or focus groups. Look at the policy with your PTO. Look at it with your boosters. Any group that will really be impacted by any changes to the policy should have an opportunity to have a conversation with the district wellness committee around that policy. So for example, if your policy, you really want to improve recess and you want to mandate recess 20 minutes a day for students in K through 6. I would love it if every district did that. But if you don't talk to your classroom teachers in the elementary school before updating that policy, you're going to get a lot of pushback. You need to think about, how are we going to implement a policy? What training needs might need to happen in order for us to have that policy become a reality? So you might have elementary school teachers who are open to having more recess, but they're going to tell you that the process for signing out the playground is broken and they need to fix that. So if you're willing to fix the playground sign out, then they're willing to make recess a daily occurrence. But there are some other things that need to happen in the background in order to make that happen. So when you have a lot of these open forums and a lot of this discussion, it really gives good information for how well the new policy is going to be, number one, received, but also implemented. And use a policy template. Most of you subscribe to the Erie-Wombosis Policy Services. The policy template that comes from Erie-Wombosis is very strong, it's very comprehensive, but there are areas where it can be improved. So don't reinvent the wheel. Don't rush the process, as I said, to check a box or meet a deadline. And a reminder that policies can and should be stronger than the federal regulations. Examples, maximum caffeine levels for high school. So the federal regulations don't have a maximum caffeine level for caffeine for high school. So you could be selling no sugar Monster drinks or Red Bull, as long as they meet the sugar requirement, those can be sold. We know that energy drinks aren't good for students. So you can put in your policy that energy drinks are not allowed to be sold in schools. Maximum sugar in school breakfast. We know that some districts are offering students chocolate milk for breakfast, in addition to the Apple Jacks and the super donut that they're getting. And so that ends up being a lot of sugar, even though they're meeting the whole grain requirement and it's getting students their milk, it's still a lot of sugar in the school breakfast. So you can work with food service to reduce the sugar in breakfast. Prohibiting waivers for physical education. I think most districts do this already, but it might not be written into their policy. And then, as we talked about earlier, requiring food at concession stands meet Smart Snacks guidelines. And as Sarah and I come in to work with you on assessing and updating your policies, we'll go through all different kinds of examples around the best practice. In that second wellness policy training in December, we'll go into more detail about these as well. All right. That is the end of the formal presentation. Questions, thoughts, concerns about updating policies?
I just
Thank-
wanted to let everyone know that I'm putting in the chat a feedback form, and we would love to hear from you, sort of what you want to learn more about wellness policies in the next training. We're still putting that one together, so please fill out the feedback form.
And make sure that you sign in on the sign-in sheet if you haven't done that yet either. Do you feel like it's doable for this year to update your policy? Are you concerned about timing or pushback? We got one thumbs up. Thumbs up. All right.
My biggest concern with us is I'm having trouble putting together our building-wide committees. They're not, our staff is not required to do so. So we have our district committee that's been showing up pretty consistently,
Mhm.
about 8 to 10 of us. But the building level committees continue to be a struggle on my end. So any suggestions for that? Are we able to move forward just as a district committee rather than building committees as well, or no?
Yes, I would say any way that you're able to move forward even a little bit, great, let's move forward. Sometimes people are willing to come to a meeting and offer some feedback if you don't add the word committee to it, because committee seems like a big commitment and a long-term group that they need to be a part of. But it is important to have building level feedback on the policy. So as part of that process, you can invite people to a meeting. And as people naturally find out more about the process, you might gain a little bit more interest, a little bit more commitment to be part of a committee when they see a certain aspect of the policy really resonates with them. Maybe they're passionate about recess. Maybe they're passionate about increasing the number of minutes for physical education that students are getting at the secondary level. Maybe they're passionate about creating more modified or adaptive basketball programs for students. Whatever it is, inviting people to a meeting and to offer some feedback is a low risk for a lot of people. And even if you invite them and maybe you just invite them to a series of meetings and it isn't a committee per se, but you end up realizing that you're getting the same people coming on a regular basis. It also can be little conversations in the hallway. Hey, we're updating the policy. Do you have a second to maybe read through it and give me some feedback? So it doesn't have to be a formal committee meeting all the time.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Sure. Danae?
So Kate, I'm just after hearing, a little bit about the requirements, obviously, I have a feeling that there are a lot of districts who are not meeting the required number of minutes. And when it comes to that in your wellness policy, you're fighting like one of two, if not both battles, where you don't have enough teaching spaces. And obviously you don't have enough staff members, right?
Yep.
So I know a while back, probably about at least 10 years ago, the state started sending a committee of people around to districts and evaluating them. And then they ran out of money and all of a sudden they stopped. And lucky for our district, they didn't make it our way. But how do you get past that and say, guess what? It's mandatory, it's the policy, it's required, and they just brush it by the wayside. Like, what do you do with that?
So it is difficult, partly because the wellness policy itself really falls under the state education department, USDA food service. So when your food service department gets audited every 3 years by SED, they're going to be looking at your wellness policy to see if it's written in compliance with the federal and state regulations. So they're going to be only slightly concerned that you're not meeting the PE minutes and might be a little slap on the wrist saying you should really work toward getting these updated. The other side is the physical education commissioner at New York State just retired. And even before he retired, he was an office of one. And it was not possible for him to go out to all of the districts. Mostly what he did was he reviewed physical education plans and gave feedback and said, yes, your plan is updated and in compliance. There's unfortunately, it's one of those mandates that isn't followed through with by the state just because there's not enough time or people. In the city of Buffalo, the parents got together and they sued the district for not meeting the PE minutes. So
It just seems like you hear a lot more of other areas that are not they're not in compliant, but then they all of a sudden become compliant. But, you know, I don't know. I don't know if anyone else is having that battle, but
a large majority of districts that we work with have the PE battle. They're not meeting the
I think
minutes.
it's an ongoing struggle. Every district I've ever worked in has struggled with getting those minutes in. And, you know, many have tried to get creative with it, but they just don't have the staffing or the space or whatever it is. That's something we're definitely working towards over here.
I do think when districts go through capital campaigns and large renovations or building projects, that having representative stakeholders involved in those plans is really critical. I worked with a district that completely redesigned a school cafeteria and kitchen system and did not ask the food service director for any input. So they are no longer allowed to have a salad bar in that district because they don't have a sink that's big enough to wash the utensils. So very simple things. So when you're doing facilities updates and changes, include the PE teachers. They can give you important information about what would help them to be able to meet the minutes. The other thing that really helps with the PE minutes is in the master schedule, if you schedule physical education first, because every student K to 12 is required to take physical education. If you schedule PE first in the master schedule, you are able to balance the classes better, and it's just easier to look at the building, the teachers, and make the numbers work a lot better. Typically, PE is scheduled last, and that makes it much more difficult to meet the minutes.
okay, just one more question. Looking back, when you talked about the Smart Snack standards,
Mhm.
I know you eventually talked about high school and what they're allowed to, but is that applicable K-12 or is that just one grade? Is that just one building?
The Smart Snack standards are for all students.
Okay.
There's a beverage difference that only
Okay.
high school students are allowed to have, sort of low calorie
Okay.
beverages and no calorie beverages, whereas for younger students it has to be milk, juice, or water.
Perfect.
But
Okay,
the food ones are the same across the board.
great. Thank you, Sharon.
And caffeine is only allowed at high school. So if you have a 7 to 12 building, you have to make sure that any space that sells caffeinated beverages is inaccessible to the middle school students, because they are not allowed to purchase items with caffeine. Any other questions? All right, well, I want to thank you for your time. As we said, please make sure that you filled out the sign-in sheet, complete the evaluation. If you have questions that come up about the policy between now and the next one, please reach out to us. We're here for you. Let us know when you want to start reviewing that policy, and we'll start to move forward.
I just wanted to say one more thing before you go. One of the things we would really like to have happen during the next session is that you have assessed your policy, and so you're coming with some specific questions from your policy. So please try to before the next meeting, have that wellness committee meeting where you assess the policy, because then we'll be able to all talk, more informed about what's in each individual policy. Thank you.
Thank you,
Have a
everyone.
great rest of your afternoon.
Have a good afternoon.